talk about this. We'll probably talk about it a little less time than what we'd originally planned because one, that was a great conversation that I really enjoyed. And two, there's wraps waiting for you, right? And who doesn't want to like bolt to a wrap? So what is retail's next chapter, right? So 80 to 110% of what I'm going to tell you is going to probably be wrong in the long lens of time. I mean, really, and can't have 110% of predictions, but the point is that if we were prognosticating across, retail, in 2020, Wall Street was certain that stores would never reopen and physical retail was dead. And the level of investment that retailers made to try and make that a self-fulfilling prophecy was stunning. For those of you who may have been in the OMS space, everybody bought the second or third generation OMS during that period of time. And what's the prediction, Yang? We're back in the stores, right? That number bounced up. Grocery went from 1 to 2% of their stores were online to 19 to 20% of their sales were online during the pandemic. And where are they now? 3-4% probably. Maybe some are higher, but we're back in the stores, right? Because if you want to buy a cucumber, you want to see the cucumber is kind of the thing that's going on. So some of these predictions, they're not really predictions, but I like this. The next era of retail won't be won by those who digitize the fastest. It'll be won by those who differentiate at scale, right? So what that really means is it's a business challenge and a technical challenge, right? And because to differentiate at scale, you have to have people, process, technology, metrics, and policies aligned in a way that you can go fast in an organization, right? And that's different than saying, we're just going to be all bits and bytes. I like the way Yang phrased it. It's human-guided AI assisted, human-guided technology assisted, right? You'll still walk into retailers who do product design. You're going to find designers. What we might be missing is junior planners and merchants because the technology might start relieving our need for those, but you're still going to find those people who are driving brands or driving businesses who are determining, I have a 15,000 store fleet of dollar stores. I have to make human-led decisions, right? But I have to be able to do it at scale. Talk about personalization, right? So if you think about the opportunity with AI and predictive analytics to drive hyper-personalization, it's really about how can I get right for the customer, right? So if I think about the retail paradigm that we've always talked about, and it's become cliche, but it's still very true. Right product, right place, right time, right price, right? And that is personalization at some level, right? If I walk into a store and they have what I want, when I want it, and what level I want to pay for it, or if I do that online, that experience feels personalized to me, right? The fact that we were able to acquire that tabby bag at the Coach store, it was part of the personalization journey, right? But if they hadn't forecasted right, put that product on the shelf, right? If they hadn't managed the inventory right? And tailoring the customer service, the technology can do all these things to create a personalized customer shopping experience. Inventory, right, is the root of all evil in retail, right? Because I can staff a store, single coverage, or 6 people on the floor, and I can adjust that in real time today or tomorrow. But if I bought 3 extra containers of a product nobody wants, I've got a challenge, right? Or if I bought 3 few containers of a product everybody wants. So if we think about that, you can't personalize a customer experience if you've got the inventory wrong, right? And that's where we have probably one of the potentials, and John will talk about this a little bit later today, to really connect the dots, right? To really step out of the darkness, because when I was planning inventory, I was using history and product review and being cajoled by the buyer to get that inventory. And then we were cutting POs. Today, I have, in organizations that are prepared data-wise, or organizations that are trying to get better on data, we have an opportunity to be much better, much more focused and intentional on the inventory we buy. And perhaps we're buying fewer markdowns, or we're chasing fewer products that are really hot, right? Because if you're in retail, you know that there's an inherent cost to being too successful versus your buy, right? You're going to air product in, or you're going to try and do something creative, and all of that goodness that you create around the product starts to erode. I'm really puzzling on the autonomous buying journeys right now, and I've been talking to people in the room today about this, but this stat came out last week. It was from Modern Retail. 20% of Walmart's referral traffic is coming through ChatGPT. Referral traffic is the interesting thing there. Like I said, you dig down and read the report, 0.1% of all of their web traffic comes from ChatGPT. 0.1. But it's a big number when you think about as a percentage of the referral business. But Walmart doesn't need referral business, right? I mean, if you're going to buy from Walmart, you're going to buy from Walmart, but this will grow, right? And this will probably say next year it'll be AI-driven referral traffic, chat bots, rather than just calling out ChatGPT, because I think Claude and Gemini and maybe never Rufus, which is the one that, if you don't know Rufus, that's Amazon's chatbot, right? Where they're getting the names. But it's interesting, and this is not a number we would have seen 3 years ago because that was pre-ChatGPT, right? So this is the imperative, right? And we're talking about this with Yang, right? First of all, you have to meet your customers where and how they shop, right? My daughter likes being in the store, right? Maybe if she was 15 years older, she'd be less likely to like being in the stores. But being Gen Z, she likes to be in the store. As a matter of fact, it's hard to get her to buy anything online. It's not hard for her to shop on TikTok or Shein, right? We haven't sworn yet today, Shein, right? I don't know how they can sell her a bathing suit for $6, but they do. But shop where they want, when they want, right? But you need consistency across platforms, right? So if I'm looking at the brand message on Instagram with a buy now button for Coach, right? I love the dinosaurs, don't understand the dinosaurs, but I love the dinosaurs. And if you know, you know. It should be the same shopping experience or curation that in the store is on the website. And sometimes the platform is going to change you a little bit, but you know, it should be the same consistency across platforms. An immersive store experience. Look, immersive doesn't mean entertainers and people dancing in the store. It doesn't, you know, because we've been told a lot that retail needs to be more an entertainment thing. What it means is that if I want to buy power tools, I should feel like I'm in the power tool capital of the world when I walk into that section. If I want to buy handbags, it should feel the same way. If I want to go buy a baseball glove, I should feel like they're in the baseball glove business, right? And it should feel immersive, right? In other words, I should forget everything other than what's going on at the moment. And then we're going to have to figure out at some point in time how to integrate VR into this, because it's going to be a thing. Raise your hand if you have Meta glasses, the Meta Ray-Bans. I'm sorry.
It's just you.
No, I saw a hand back there. Now some of that is we have a client involved with that, but the rest of it is it's leading edge. It is not mature. It's not that thing, but there is a point coming where you're going to walk into a store and VR is going to be real, AR is going to be real, and you're going to be wearing glasses, or you'll be wearing AirPods that will engage you in an experience in that store, right? These things aren't here. They will be here. We can pretty much say for certain that nobody's going to put on a HoloLens and walk into a store and shop. Nobody's going to put on VR headsets and walk into a store and shop. I think nobody, it's hard to get definitive, but integration of virtual reality, whether it's at your desk, on your tablet, on your phone, or in the physical space, is coming, because one of the advantages of doing that is if you do it well, you can curate the process, right? So if I can push media to you in that way, I can create that immersive experience. It's still, though, 70% of us are going to walk in and grab something off of the shelf and look at it. And if you've ever tried to buy a car online, you know that's a terrible experience. You need to go see the car in person. It just doesn't work that well. It's not very well curated. So there's opportunities. Some challenges must be addressed before agent-led shopping can thrive, right? Consumer trust. Do I trust that if my agent sees that I have a meeting in New York next week, and it realizes that it's been 2 years since I bought a new sport coat, it wants to get me a sport coat. Do I trust that the agent can do that for me without me guiding it, right? And will I adopt that? Transparency, data availability, right? Do you know enough about me? Do we know enough about the places that could solve my problems? And is it transparent, right? What I don't want eventually is an agent who is co-opted by somebody else who's buying things for me on behalf of my needs, but they've gotten funding from another company, right? So now suddenly everything I buy is from Procter & Gamble because Procter & Gamble is investing in the agents, right? You're not gonna want that. Brand differentiation. I ask this question, I keep asking this question, how do you stand out when it's machine to machine talking? How does your brand stand out in that conversation? Nick, you asked that too. And then we'll talk more about this after lunch, but how do we connect everything together so we can execute the promise we're making to the customer, right? For those of us who are in the planning space for lots and lots of years on the retail planning end, assortment and MFP, it was an ivory tower that did not lead directly to execution. You might hand off to somebody who's writing your POs, you might execute POs, but there's an allocator who takes over your life at some point in time. Today, we're connecting that planning behavior with the execution behavior in a direct way, and we'll see technology will foster that, right? So the notion that I had separate people thinking about allocation, separate people thinking about the plan, separate people moving the product through the distribution network, and it's all disconnected, connecting planning and execution, it's going to be a full system. And I don't mean system by technology, I mean system like biologically a system. It's going to work together as an organism that runs your business. Okay. Disruption. This isn't all of them, but since 2000, if anybody tells you supply chain has become resilient, they need to think about all the times we've disrupted it, and it's caused major headaches for retailers and consumer product companies. But things like microchip platform SARS, Katrina, the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, but port strikes, right? How many of us have lived through that? We don't even have on here. Oh, there it is. Suez Canal block. Ship gets sideways in the Suez Canal and nobody can get product. Not because their product was on that ship, but because a certain amount of the stuff that works through the world. Pirates off the coast of Africa and Asia. All these things are supply chain disruptions. And then there's our favorite one of 2025, which is, I like to call it Russian roulette with pricing because it changes every day. You spin the barrel and get there, right? Sorry for the example, but the reality is that is a supply chain disruption because you might have to think, you guys have moved out of China for a lot of your business, but Nike made a big bet, move out of China, move to Vietnam. And for about 12 weeks this year, they thought Vietnam was going to be over 40% tariffs. Now it drifted back down to 20, right? Still, right? They made multi-billion dollars investment moving their supply chain to someplace that then became a target. So that is a supply chain disruption. And the whole point here is that 30 years ago, most of us worked in supply chains that were much less complex, right? Much less stretched out. And we think we're building flexibility, but I'd like you to follow me on this because I was thinking about this morning, right? So we went from single points or a couple points of distribution in our supply chains, and we still see this in chips, right? Microchips, it's like 80% of microchips are coming out of Taiwan, right? But what we did is we started spreading the chips around, not to microchips, but spreading them around on the board. And we think that gives us flexibility, but if you look at the disruptions in there, right? I get typhoons, I get strikes, I get all these things. These are points that create the disruption. So if we build flexibility, we have to think about how we build resiliency in that flexibility. Otherwise, that spider web supply chain becomes like cracks on your windshield, right? You'd rather have just the one chip, not the cracks, right? So if we want to do this right, we need to both diversify our suppliers, but we need to harden our suppliers, right? So if you think about that, I just don't want to run to Laos for supply. I need to know that I've vetted that supplier to the point where they're going to meet my demands, right? We need to create some flexibility in the process. We need thinking in our teams. It's like to challenge the norm, to start looking, and we can use AI, but start looking for the signals that something might be going wrong. The supplier was always good and suddenly they slipped a day or two. What does that mean, right? Intelligent planning. How do we connect this together, right? Planning is not just head office thinking about what we want to do. It's what I'm capable of doing in my supply chain, what my distribution can do, what my transportation network can do, all that together. When I was buying at Pottery Barn way a long time ago, we all wrote our POs for fall to deliver on 7/31. All of us, 14 planners. So what we would hear when we'd go visit the DC in Memphis is, what are you, nuts, right? And then we would get unique things like, because all of this was landing, there weren't enough truck bodies to put the containers on to haul them to the DCs, because we and everybody else were creating these clogs in the supply chain. None of us were doing intentionally, right? So bi-directional, bilateral, both, and then automate your operations, right? This is not about taking people out of the process. This is about giving people the ability to do things faster and more intentionally to unlock capacity, right? So whether it's automating a distribution center, so you can take a building and double its capacity, or it's thinking about automating your supply chain planning process so you can get past exceptions at a speed where you can make decisions and change your inventory point of view to better absorb those shocks, right? Fundamentally, like in a DC, if you're running at 85% capacity, you're at 100% capacity, right? You've got no flexibility, because if things go wrong, if you have to peak above that. So think about how we can streamline and automate and better use our working capital for the places we want to place it. I like this one because, first, personally, I have a great affection for Venn diagrams, but for those of us who have done this work for a while, it's getting harder and harder to find the skilled labor to do the work. Not a lot of people want to sign up to be planners out of college today, or merchants even. Some people still think that is glamorous, but definitely are having a hard time in the other parts of the supply chain finding the right labor, right? So how do we understand, and oh, by the way, we're not replacing population fast enough to grow those roles anyway, right? So how do we deal with the skilled labor shortages and still do our business? Well, intelligent automation, right? So there will be some case where 3 people will have to do the work of 5, or you'll move your distribution center to more automation, or you move transportation to a more automated process in order to compensate for skilled labor shortages, right? I want you to picture Evansville, Indiana, not a big place, right? Not a big place at all. As a university, decent sized town, but it has a cluster, a forest of distribution centers around it, right? And every time I've talked to people who have distribution centers in Evansville, the first thing they say is, I have a hard time hiring people, right? Because they've used the entire addressable market, hired them all. So, when Shoe Carnival needs a person, they are stealing one from Chris's operation over there, right? So automation can help us through that, not just in distribution, but even in the buying office, in the planning activities, product design, right? Finding people who are passionate about product design, they still exist, but maybe you can augment that with artificial intelligence in a way that they can speed that process up, which means you'll have less resource per product in the process, right? Upskilling workforce, these are opportunities, supply chain operators, creating a more flexible and capable workforce. AI collaboration. I like the concept. I'm going to use it now, Yang, in all my conversations. Human-led, AI-assisted, create productivity gains, and then connecting the systems. For those of us who've been on the system side, right? WMS thinks of WMS and it forgets everything it did today when it starts tomorrow. TMS is all about getting that today's load moving, right? Start thinking about labor management, execution systems, planning systems. All these systems have robust behaviors and data underneath them that is not shared between them. And I'm not talking about system integration. I'm talking about intelligence among these applications, right? So, if we can start to orchestrate through using, whether it's AI or a foundational data layer like Fabric that connects these parts together, we can start getting warehouse behaviors that are in alignment with my planning and buying behaviors that are in alignment with my customer expectations and the promises that I'm making in the business. Lead with transparency. Did you see 60 Minutes the other night? Go to YouTube and find the video, because it's a long form video. It's not just about Guy Fieri, but he lost 2 semis full of tequila, right? So this is how it happened. The tequila is produced in a plant, distillery in Mexico. It's shipped to Laredo across the border. At Laredo, the tequila company has used a shipping broker to broker the transportation of that tequila to their Pennsylvania warehouse. That broker actually pushed that off to a secondary broker. This happens all the time, right? So now the secondary broker is going to book the transportation companies. They hired 2 transportation companies to haul this tequila. The problem is the transportation companies were shells that didn't really exist. Unvetted criminals, and those companies use their shells and their registration as a broker to hire unwitting drivers who picked up the 2 loads of tequila and moved it to Los Angeles so it could be sold on the black market. Right?
So it wasn't the drivers.
It wasn't the drivers. The drivers have been clear. It was very clear to see that they got, these guys got messages that there's a load, right? And so the point here is, there are things that are going on in supply chain. And we talked for a decade or more about blockchain preventing this sort of stuff, and nobody's implemented the safeties. You hear about this man-in-the-middle kind of broker attack all the time. But I just thought it was interesting as we were coming into this that we still have highwaymen on the side of the road stealing their freight, right? Transparency is 2-part promise, customer awareness, and real-time tracking. I think that the intersection there is going to be data security, probably, if you think about it, right? But we're trying to make sure that if we're operating a supply chain, that it has a level of transparency so the business and potentially an end customer knows exactly what's going on, right? So if you think about a direct-to-consumer purchase, right, the first thing that I wonder after I made it is, did I get the confirmation? Then I start watching if it's telling me when it's coming. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So transportation, the transparency in the supply chain is important. Real-time tracking, right? This is very important. If we go back to the couple slides ago where we said connect everything together, this is how you can supply these pieces. I think that here's the thing. We start by challenging the status quo in our supply chain, and supply chain by our definition today is everything from basically the manufacturer's dock to the customer's hand. All those behaviors in between, which are the plan, buy, move, sell behaviors, right? So how do we challenge the status quo? Data readiness, and maybe that's the first thing. We need to talk about data. We need to have a really hard conversation about data, because if any of you have ever been in a retailer who tells you that data is good, Yang excluded, right? Yang excluded. If you've ever been there, it is similar to being told the check's in the mail because the data isn't good. Okay. So what is your data readiness? And this is a conversation about AI. You can't achieve anything with AI if you can't figure out if you've got the right data, right? And then transformation is a mindset, not a project to manage, right? And I think that this was what we heard in Yang earlier, which is we are always thinking about ideas spinning up ideas that can lead to transformation. This is not a once every decade project, right? Retail has evolved tremendously. It's transformed. Those people who have transformed with it are still here today. And if you think about how few retailers were in business successfully in 1975 that are in business today in 2025, it is shocking who hasn't transformed, right? It is stunning, right? So it is very much, you need to be thinking that what you do today is not going to be what you do tomorrow, right? You need to think that way across your entire supply chain. And with that, are there any questions? Otherwise, Stephanie would like to remind you that there's a lovely spread here for lunch.